Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 2nd of December. As always, we hope you're keeping up to date with the latest weather and forecast information for your part of Alaska. You can do that easily by listening to Marine VHF, NOAA Weather Radio, or logging on to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line's open at 800-472-0391. You can find us on Facebook during the day. There's been several posts there today just on the winter weather in the interior and in South Central alone. You can find us there at NWS Alaska. On Twitter, using the hashtag AKwx, that'll get you into the broader forecast conversation for all of Alaska. And on YouTube during the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing for all of Alaska. You can follow us there at NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks. NWS Alaska is a good place to go as well. And then following this show, using the tag there in the search bar, AKwx TV, you can find the complete Alaska weather broadcast brought to you by our Alaska partners here at alaskapublic.org. Here's a look at the winter storm warning that's still in effect for a large part of the interior tonight and some of the snowfall totals we have from NWS Fairbanks. Lake Minchumina, about 4.5 inches, and this was as of about noon today, so certainly more has fallen since then. Two Rivers, Esther, and Fairbanks all seeing about 2.5 inches of snow, and anywhere from about 1.5 to 2 inches of snow from Aurora to the UAF West Ridge area to about College. You're still looking about a couple inches of snow and at least another 3 to 5 inches of snow from what you've seen from noon all the way through the overnight hours. The winter storm warning is still in effect for this region until about 6 o'clock on Wednesday, and some of the heavier snowfall amounts in that area will be generally south of the Bettles area. So more to come for you. Here's a broader look at the map all the way from the Alcan stretching all the way back to eastern sections of Norton Sound. And this is on top of the freezing rain chance that you had yesterday, especially in those western areas. So in general, about another 3 to 6 inches of snow for some areas. The heaviest amounts is going to be south of the Bettles area, but it does include more snow in some of the higher terrain for areas surrounding Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley and Tanana itself and into the Yukon Flats. On top of that, there's going to be some more wind crossing over the Alaska range, and in those regions, gusts upwards of 40 to 45 miles per hour are expected during the daytime tomorrow. So the winds are going to start coming up, and as you get into the daytime tomorrow, those stronger gusts will start to appear across the Alaska range, the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, and around the Healy region and some of the higher terrain around Denali itself. So plan for some changes during the day as the snow winds down. The wind should start to pick up. And we're still watching for some high surf conditions there. We're looking for breaking waves upwards around 6 to 10 feet for the western sections of the Seward Peninsula and the St. Lawrence Island seacoast, and coastal surge of about 1 to 2 feet. And that'll continue through tonight. Probably winding down slowly. Looks like some of the worst of it should have happened, so conditions should be subsiding as we go through the remainder of the evening. The advisory is just about done. As we look out to the west, it's not hard to find the latest weather maker and the one that's developing. Out a little bit further west of the Bering Sea, you can see a pretty strong area of low pressure. That's that spiraling shape that you pick up here west of the Kamchatka Peninsula. That large area of low pressure is working against the colder northerly flow coming into our current system that's moving through the central and eastern chain and the north sections of the Gulf of Alaska. Putting this into motion, you can see that north and easterly flow. This is part of what's wrapping into that a decent snowmaker that's falling across the lower and middle Yukon Valley and slowly working its way eastward. This next slug of moisture will help us to start the process once again. Not saying there's going to be another repeat of exactly the snow you're seeing, but we're keeping a very unsettled pattern going across the Aleutians and certainly across the northern Gulf. and eventually some of that's going to work its way back into southwest and probably south central, perhaps even the interior of Alaska as we go through the next 5 to 7 days. Here's a look at the rest of Alaska, and for southeast, you've seen the precipitation wind down with some snow the last 24 hours or so. Now you're seeing this pattern change over to more of a wetter situation where rain will come down on snow, so it's an interesting situation to watch for sure. Watch for some milder weather to move through. There's still plenty of moisture located over your region, but as we go over the next 2 to 3 days, you'll probably start to see some drier conditions develop, and you'll see that as we get into the Thursday and Friday maps here in the coming days. Northward, this very bright band of cloud cover across the interior is indicating a lot of lift in the atmosphere, a lot of cold cloud tops. That tells the meteorologists that there's a lot of lift going on in the atmosphere and there's a lot of precipitation potentially under these clouds. And certainly we know that to be true after looking at some of the snowfall reports there around the Fairbanks region from earlier this morning. Snow will continue in earnest there, and the winter storm warnings are still in effect until 6 o'clock in the morning for a large part of the interior and up and down the Yukon Valley. For South Central, snow was falling earlier this morning. That changed over to rain, and temperatures have warmed up. The problem is that now that we have wet conditions on top of road surfaces there and refreezing is expected tonight, that could make for some slick travel. So if you're driving up and down the Sterling Highway or planning to drive up the Parks Highway toward the interior, plan for some probably not ideal driving conditions, even for wintertime, of course. So be extra careful there and give yourself a little bit of extra time to get to where you need to go safely. As you look out across the southwest, an interesting situation developed there earlier this morning. A lot of the cumulus clouds that you see here are a little bit more reminiscent of what you might see in the middle of summer across the interior. And indeed, these cumulus clouds were capable of producing showers, but also were producing lightning. So we had a lot of cold air in the upper atmosphere and a lot of lift coming in from the surface layers, and that developed some showers and even some thunderstorms and some strikes earlier this morning, I should say, stretching from areas in the eastern Aleutians all the way into just a little bit south and west of Kodiak and Sand Point. So certainly a potent weather system working through. Here's a look at the surface chart. We've got warmer air slowly nudging its way into southeastern Alaska thanks to high pressure at 1,023 millibars south of Haida Gwaii. Low pressure is also working through south central. The main core of that is out across the eastern Bering Sea, just west of the Kuskokwim Bay. And again, we drew on those few showers and thunderstorms that we saw across the Alaska Peninsula and the northern Pacific earlier this morning. Snow is falling again up and down the Yukon Valley, as you know already, and east of Barrow, some light snow falling there. Pockets of fog are to be expected as we head into the next 24 hours there. Most of what you're looking at should be light snow shower activity there across the north coast. Across the Chukchi Seacoast, a better chance for some snow along a trough of low pressure extending from the western Seward Peninsula northward. And again, wind should be dying down in that region as we head into the overnight hours. An area of low pressure here and that frontal boundary should stall out across the interior. That will be the focus for more snow during the overnight hours, but eventually that situation should be weakening and diminishing in its snowfall efficiency. Colder air dropping southward continues to work its way toward the Aleutians, and you'll notice we have another circulation moving its way toward the western Aleutians. This will mainly stay right along the chain there, heading for Adak and Atka, about 990 millibars for Wednesday. High pressure is trying to set up across the Copper River Basin. It won't completely squash our snow showers across south central and the higher terrain, so watch for some more precipitation during the day. And in fact, for the Anchorage area, it looks like around the Bowl, the Matanuska Valley, and parts of the Kenai Peninsula, there may be some areas that pick up another couple inches of snow at least overnight into tomorrow, so I'll plan on additional accumulations in the area. For coastal areas, a better chance for rainfall there just outside of Kodiak. You might see that mix in with snow from time to time, and light rain is possible for a good chunk of southeast, especially for coastal areas during the day. Getting into Thursday, low pressure still with us across the North Pacific. It's gradually working its way eastward, and you can see the other circulations we have south of Kodiak and into the heart of the Gulf of Alaska. What that's doing is broadening that southeasterly flow that's bringing more moisture and running that into some of the colder air we have up across the Alaska Range and south central. That should keep our chance for precipitation, sometimes mixing that with rain, possible across the Kenai Peninsula and parts of the Alaska Peninsula, and into more of the southern sections of the Alaska Range, maybe up the Parks Highway as well. Out across the west coast, Kotzebue Sound, Seward Peninsula, and the northern sections of the YK Delta, watch for snow showers to continue there. But you'll also notice that more and more drier air is working in thanks to high pressure across the northern Yukon. As that happens, the efficient snow machine that we've seen for the last 24 hours across the interior will start to wind down and kind of run out of gas. Up across the northern Arctic coast, you're looking at snow showers there with more of an easterly flow. Some of that moisture has found its way up across the coast, and we expect with it more of an east and northeasterly wind that snow showers will come passing through from time to time, but also watch out for areas of fog and diminished visibility. Low pressure still working its way eastward across the North Pacific, and by the time we see that Thursday afternoon, it could drop to about 977 millibars, and there's a lot more cold air to work with, so we're going to have to keep an eye on that and see how energetic it gets as we head into Friday and Saturday. In the meantime, temperatures today were across southeast, 30s and 40s generally there. Coastal areas were a little bit warmer. Same goes for Ketchikan and Annette. Hyder was a cooler 25. Around Juneau and points northward, mid-20s to about mid-30s today. Prince William Sound dropped into the lower 30s around Valdez. Kenai was 33, 10 degrees warmer in Homer, and Anchorage saw temps around the mid-30s today. By late afternoon, it was considerably warmer. Around Talkeetna and Squetna, we saw temps in the 20s there. Healy was only 30 degrees, not too shabby at all. 22 in Fairbanks, 14 in Eagle, and 11 in Northway today. Ann up in Eagle said that the ice was moving around a little bit on the Yukon itself, so obviously some temperatures have warmed up there, either upstream or in that region, to allow some of that ice to move on the Yukon. So we'll probably show you some pictures there tomorrow. Around Fort Yukon, 3 degrees this afternoon, about the same around Arctic Village. Anaktuvuk Pass was down to 6 below. At Kasuk, bitter 10 below, while Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse was about 15 below. On the coast, Barrow was only 8 below. Nome showing 15, Unalakleet about 23. Grayling and McGrath both in the lower to mid-20s today as you head down toward Bristol Bay. Saw temps in the low to mid-30s. King Salmon was 36, and that was pretty much the rule for most of the Alaska Peninsula. The Pribilofs in the upper 30s, and the Chain showing temps in the 30s and 40s. We'll keep temps pretty steady there for most of the overnight hours. Southwest looking at lows in the upper 20s. A lot of the interior north of the Yukon will see milder weather thanks to the clouds and snow on the ground. Look for temps from about 1 above to as cold as 10 below in Arctic Village, 5 to 15 below for the Arctic coast, and southeast in the mid-30s with south central in the upper 20s to lower 30s. For high temps tomorrow, look for readings near 40 around Kodiak, and upper 30s and low 40s for the Chain in the Alaska Peninsula. Southwest, upper 20s and lower 30s. The interior, single digits and low to mid-teens. Most areas in the Arctic coast closer to 0 tomorrow afternoon, and upper 30s to low 40s for southeast. Prince William Sound also hovering close to freezing. Here's a look at your flying weather now. A wide area of MVFR for most of the Gulf and coastal regions there. IFR conditions for Prince William Sound and pockets in southwest, and things should be improving for the Alaska range in the west. Watch for IFR on the Chukchi Seacoast and south of the Chain tomorrow. Otherwise, MVFR conditions for most in the Bering. We'll see conditions hover around MVFR for Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass tomorrow. Watch for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass to see some improvements during the day. Rainy Pass should also see some visibility lifting during the day. Windy Pass looking at improvements toward MVFR during your Wednesday. Isabel Pass should start at IFR with conditions changing a little bit toward the better during the day. Montazda Pass probably VFR through most of the afternoon. And Tanita Pass we expect to see conditions lift a little bit from IFR toward MVFR. Watch for Portage Pass to hover close to IFR conditions through most of your Wednesday, and Chilkoot and White Pass are also expecting some improvements there. Freezing levels show the surface freezing line hovering the Gulf Coast and then kind of bouncing north of the Pribilofs up toward Nunivak Island, and you'll notice that's approaching the ice edge a little bit later when we check on that map. Notice there's also some warmer air lifting into the southern Bering Sea, those levels as high as 2,000 to 4,000 feet approaching the islands. Icing potential is generally light, maybe some isolated pockets of occasional to widespread moderate across the lower and middle Yukon Valley, and that's again along all that moisture accumulating in the frontal boundary for the interior. Generally above 2,000 feet for the interior, and out across the west that's a little bit higher, closer to about 4,000 feet. And that makes a lot of sense when you look at the jet stream and the colder air dropping southward here. The main corridor of fast-moving winds that's driving our weather right now is generally south of Alaska, with wind speeds as high as 120 to about 150 knots. At 9,000 feet, that southwesterly flow coming into the west coast is trying to bring warmer air further and further northward. Wind speeds off the Chukchi Seacoast are running around 40 knots, south of the Aleutians as high as 50 knots, and the ridge of high pressures sending warmer air into the interior, coming across south central with winds there as high as 20 to about 35 knots in some cases. At 3,000 feet, that ridge is a little bit more tilted to the west. You can see 20 to 35 knot winds there. Things really slow down across southeast. The southerly flow working up the west coast comes in around 20 to 30 knots. Winds are light around the Brooks Range at 15 knots with a northeasterly flow grazing the north coast. Turbulence potential then is mainly a coastal issue, it looks like there, from the Chukchi Seacoast at St. Lawrence Island. The Aleutians below 4,000 feet with some occasional moderate possible there in the west. and also around and just north of the Alaska range, and especially for the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. Watch for that to increase tomorrow with wind advisories going into effect. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Winter, cold, wet, and deadly. Every year, snowstorms strand hundreds of people in their cars, isolate thousands in their homes, and kill those who are unprepared. In this film, you will see and hear true stories about 6 people caught in severe winter weather and isolated from help. Ed and Paul Maluski were going to their cabin to button it up for the winter when it began to snow.
The storm hit about halfway up the mountain. By the time we got about a mile from our cabin, we kept getting stuck every 10 feet.
We were always out digging, which got us wet. Then the snow got real heavy, and you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. It was pretty clear the Bronco wasn't going to make it, so we figured we'd walk to a neighbor's cabin. It wasn't real far, and we know that area like the back of our hands.
The funny thing is, everything changes at night. With the blizzard, you couldn't tell which way you were going. I thought I knew, but boy, I just couldn't tell for sure.
Dad! Leave this back here! We don't need it! There's food in the cabin!
You know, it was funny. I'd be thinking real clear for a while, and then just didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. I couldn't even remember Paul's name, my own boy, and I couldn't remember his name.
I got worried wading through that snow. Dad was really beat. He could barely keep up. I started thinking about things I'd never thought about before. I fell and dropped our flashlight and didn't pick it up right away like you normally would. I knew we were getting delirious then. Then we hit that gate. Well, it's nowhere near the cabin.
We've gone too far! Let's go back to the Bronco!
Paul, we can't go back. We wouldn't make it. I wouldn't make it. We've got to find that cabin or we can't make it. Now, come on, we've got to find that cabin.
From then on, I just kept thinking, you gotta keep going. You gotta keep pushing.
I saw that cabin and said one long prayer. I could hardly believe we finally found it. We walked for 2.5 hours and it was less than a half mile from the Bronco. All I could think was, we had to get inside. We finally got in. And then we didn't say anything at all. We didn't talk.
Ed and Paul had become victims of hypothermia, a physical condition caused by a person's body losing more heat than it produces. The result? A dangerously low body temperature. When Ed and Paul were outside, the conditions were perfect for hypothermia to set in. It was cold, and they were tired and wet. First, their bodies tried to generate more heat to combat the cold. They began to shiver. It was a losing battle. The constant exposure to cold, wet weather defeated this first line of their body's defense. Then, in order to keep the remaining heat concentrated in the body core, the brain, heart, and lungs, their bodies began to cut down blood circulation to their arms and legs. This gave their vital organs a fighting chance to continue functioning. But it also caused the loss of muscle control in their hands, legs, and arms. As their natural defenses gradually began to break down, they became more confused and disoriented. If they had not found the cabin, the cold would have defeated all their body's defenses, and they would have died. In this kind of emergency, the first thing to do is get out of the cold. Then carefully begin rewarming the body. The most important areas to rewarm first are those areas nearest the body core, the sides of the chest, the neck, the groin, and the head. These are the areas of highest heat loss and highest heat absorption. Warming these areas first lets the body build back and hold its heat, starting with the body core and gradually spreading to the rest of the body. Ed and Paul did not rewarm themselves correctly. They began by warming their hands and feet, and that could have killed them. Warming the body's extremities first forces cold blood to flow back to the body core. The result is usually death. Paul went to bed that night shivering uncontrollably because his body had not been rewarmed properly. Both men needed medical assistance desperately. It's a miracle they survived. Part of the miracle was the cabin they broke into. It was owned by a man who believed in being prepared for anything.
Once we got warmed up, we found plenty of wood for the fire. Besides, there was a propane tank to heat the cabin too.
There was plenty of food, enough to last us a couple of weeks. And you could eat it right out of the can. You didn't need a stove to cook it on.
Nothing. Well, they know we're gone. Yeah, they should.
Candles, flashlights, lanterns, all were on hand with plenty of batteries and fuel to keep them working. Ed and Paul even found a battery-powered radio. It was a relief to hear that rescuers were out looking for them. The cabin had a well-stocked first aid kit, too. Ed and Paul were stranded way up in the mountains, far from any help. But even in a city, snowstorms can be dangerous, especially for the elderly. The elderly can fall victim to hypothermia even at home. It's essential for them to maintain warm room temperatures of 68 degrees Fahrenheit or more. Continued exposure to low room temperatures can easily cause older people to become hypothermic, and it is very difficult to detect.
Your turn now.
They usually don't shiver as hypothermia takes hold, but their breathing may become shallow and their heartbeat may slow down. Either of these symptoms during cold weather means medical help is needed immediately. The best cure, of course, for anyone is prevention. Stay warm all the time, eat well and regularly, and keep physically fit. These factors will help protect you from winter cold.
Did you get back to the clinic this morning? Good.
Quick check of sea ice conditions shows that over the last couple days we've seen a lot of it fill in here, even right between Nunivak Island and the YK Delta there. So watch for some changes as soon as low pressure quits sending some of that southerly winds right up the western coast. In the meantime, for southeastern Alaska, light winds are expected across the inner waterways, about 10 to 15 knots or so, with seas generally 2 to 3 feet in most areas. And onshore winds will continue for the northern entrances with an 11-foot sea outside of Gustavus and a southerly flow coming into Yakutat around 10 knots. By Thursday, offshore winds develop 15 to 20 knots with seas running from 8 to 9 feet. Some higher gusts may develop across the inner waterways coming from Stevens Passage northward toward the Lynn Canal with winds around 20 to 25 knots and seas run up to about 4 to 5 feet. For south central, look for southerly winds to continue across Prince William Sound. Inside and outside, that's about 15 knots with 20 to 25 knots coming down from Resurrection Bay to the Barren Islands. Look for seas inside of Cook Inlet to run around 3 to 4 feet or so. Kodiak Islands looking at winds from the east and southeast that become a little bit more northeasterly inside of Shelikof Strait for Thursday. And winds come up to 25 to as high as 35 knots with seas from 5 to as high as 10 feet. Now across the north and western Gulf, seas run up to 8 to 11 feet with winds around 25 to 30 knots northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound. For the Alaska Peninsula, expect light and variable winds north of Cold Bay with an 8-foot sea there. Inside of Bristol Bay, they're down to 4 feet. A southeasterly flow from Castle Cape to about Chignik with seas from 9 to 10 feet in the North Pacific. And then watch for those winds to continue from the east with about 20 knots there. 9 to 10-foot seas are expected there and 4 to 8-foot seas on the north side for Thursday. As we get into the Aleutians on Wednesday, look for northwesterly winds from Nikolsky to Atka, about 15 to 30 knots. A variable flow south of Unalaska and Nikolsky with 10-foot seas there, and southerlies from Adak to Atka with a 9-foot sea. East and southeasterly winds in the west and west central region, about 20 to 25 knots, that become northwesterly by Thursday, and seas still holding on to about 10 feet or so. An east and southeasterly flow for the eastern chain, about 15 knots on the Bering Sea side, and coming up to 10 to 30 knots there on the Pacific side, about 10 to 12 feet are expected there for Thursday afternoon. For the west coast, northerlies continue with freezing spray an issue, especially close to the ice edge. 4 to 7-foot seas are expected from St. Lawrence Island down to Nunivak Island. A southeasterly flow in the Kuskokwim Bay around 15 knots, and northerlies for the Pribilofs around 9-foot seas are expected there. Those winds become easterly on Thursday, 20 knots with a 7-foot sea. We'll also see easterly winds off of Umanak to St. Lawrence Island with a 5-foot sea. Otherwise, winds up to 20 knots from Hooper Bay down to the Kuskokwim Bay region. For the north slope, look for an easterly flow coming across the ice about 25 knots all the way out to Barrow. Stronger winds there for the Chukchi seacoast as high as 35 knots with freezing spray an issue there for Wednesday. And again on Thursday, a broad easterly flow from Barrow down toward the Kotzebue Sound region, about 15 to 30 knots in general, and a light flow about east to northeast around 15 knots from Barrow toward Kaktovik as we head into Thursday afternoon. Recapping tonight's weather, snow is still falling across the lower, middle, and even upper Yukon Valley, and storm totals could run as high as 6 to 12 inches, though we expect that most of that will wind down from west to east during the evening and overnight hours. Already some places have seen as high as 4 to 6 inches there since noon today. Snow showers will continue across south central by the end of tomorrow. Some places around the Anchorage Bowl and the Mat-Su Valleys could be looking at another 1 to 4 inches of snow. And snow that fell across southeast, well, you're back into more of a rainy pattern as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. Southwest conditions remain unsettled there with a southerly flow working up the west coast, and high surf conditions will slowly subside across the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.